And we are going to kick things off with Paul Clark, who is the Water Supply Watershed Protection Coordinator in the Stormwater Program in the Division of Energy, Mineral, and Land Resources for DEQ. After working in environmental consulting for a few years after school, Paul joined NCDEHNR, now NCDEQ. He worked in public water supply, NPDES, wastewater permitting, pre-treatment, DENR, now DEQ, customer service, and the one-stop permitting, the Raleigh Regional Office, and water planning use restoration watershed program prior to joining Stormwater in January 2019. He currently serves as the WSWP program coordinator, but assists in other stormwater areas as well. So Paul, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Kaylee. I appreciate it. As everyone can tell, I have been able to work with DENR and now DEQ for several years, and it's been really interesting. I've got to work with a lot of interesting people and learn a lot over the years. But as Kaylee said, this afternoon my focus is going to be on providing a stormwater overview and update, since I currently in the stormwater branch within DIMLR. I usually like to start, I'm guessing I'm addressing most folks who are water professionals of some type or another, but I always like to start sort of as a reminder is why are we even here? Why are we doing what we're doing? So I always start in why are we even protecting water resources, and that is the water quality and the water quantity. And these are a few of the reasons. Water supply is often at the top of the list because you find when you're working with folks for a while, people seem to be most interested in protecting the water when it is a drinking water source. But there are other reasons to protect the water as well, and so I've listed several here, but with the question marks at the end, there are probably some that I may have forgotten. And one of the reasons related to why we have to protect these water resources is because it's a limited resource, and that there's no new water being generated. And so the interconnection between groundwater and surface water, it's all one water supply that if we're not good stewards of that supply, that could have negative effects on a lot of folks, a lot of people, a lot of ecosystems. And so therefore, I'm within DIMLR, but many of you are probably familiar with the Division of Water Resources as well. And those are the two main divisions within DEQ that work to protect the water resources of the state. So basically, there are two primary acts that focus on water, and that is the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And although EPA, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, is responsible for implementing both of those acts, both of those acts are pretty much delegated to various programs within the Division of Water Resources and DIMLR. Basically, EPA serves an oversight role. So I'll start at the top and work my way down. There are a number of different divisions within the Department of Environmental Quality. As Kaylee mentioned during the bio she was providing, DENR has changed over time. We used to be a lot bigger than we are now. When I first started in the 90s, the department included all of the health divisions as well, milk sanitation, pest management, a lot of different divisions that are now within the Department of Health and Human Services. And then more recently, a number of our divisions were removed from DENR, excuse me, and went to what's now, I think, the Department of Cultural and Natural Resources. So the parks and the aquariums and the zoo and the museum, all those, they also used to be within our department as well. But under the most recent reorganization, the divisions you see on the screen now are the divisions that compose DEQ. So as you see, Energy, Mineral, and Land Resources is one of those divisions. And actually, as you can see too, primarily now, DEQ is primarily a regulatory agency. Most of the agencies listed here, with the exception of perhaps Environmental Assistance and Customer Service and Environmental Education and Public Affairs, the majority of these divisions are dealing in the regulatory realm to some degree or another. So going down further within DIMLR, it's not a very large, not a very large division. But Stormwater, which used to be within Division of Water Resources, is now within DIMLR. The reason I provided this slide is I must admit, I didn't actually time how long my presentation is going to take. And I'm thinking it may not occupy the full 45 minutes. I mean, even allotting time at the end for questions, I may have time at the remainder to not only ask questions, but to, if there's time, to even cover some of these other divisions within the Division of Water Resources. And there's at least two reasons I want to do that. One is just the conference itself is a water resources conference, and the Division of Water Resources is the main division within DEQ that deals with water resources. Within DIMLR, it's a smaller section within DIMLR that deals with water resources. So that's one reason. Another reason is just my personal experience. I have previous to this position, I have worked in several different areas within the Division of Water Resources. And so just having gained experience in that area, I'm in a position to be able to share some of that as well. So again, that's sort of what your appetite. If I have time, I may cover some of these things. But if not, you can maybe always reach out to me later or that type of thing. But again, the focus of this presentation, excuse me, is going to be the stormwater branch. There are two main subsets, if you will, two main areas within the stormwater program. Excuse me, there's the federal programs, which is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which is comprised of an industrial component and then the municipal separate storm sewer system. You may have heard the term MS4. Those are the two key components of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, part of the stormwater. But then there's also what's called the state programs, also stormwater related, and that's post-construction, and then water supply, watershed protection, and that is the program that I'm the coordinator of that program. So this update pertains to the entire branch, the entire stormwater program. Some of the other updates that I'm providing are more specific to a smaller group, and that's why I'm starting with the Laserfiche update. Stormwater now for, I don't know, I've only been with the group about 1.5 years or so, but this effort has been underway for at least, I don't know, 2 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, or that type of thing. We are in the process of trying to digitize as much of our records as we can. And we've made pretty good progress in that area. So we have all of the NPDES, our individual and general permits, and I'm going to talk more specifically about these different items later, but our NPDES individual general permits, including construction, our NPDES MS4 permits, they are all completely digitized. We are in the process of digitizing the post-construction stormwater permits. That is a very large amount of information to be digitized. And then we're also just at the front end of digitizing the water supply watershed information. And again, I'll talk about that more later. But that's one of the updates that pertains to our entire stormwater group. And hopefully we'll be done with that and only have to digitize new information within maybe 1 year or so, maybe a little bit longer. So to drill down a little bit in more detail about this specific stormwater program. So there is the federal NPDES program. What I like to do when introducing this program, and I I've presented to a number of different audiences. So some questions I've got in the past pertain to, do I even need a permit? I have a facility, does this facility even need a permit? So I like to start again at a very basic level with asking the question, does your facility of concern have a point source discharge? Because if you have a facility and it has some different activities and that type of thing going on, but stormwater is such that it maybe will run off from the facility, but just infiltrate into the ground, there may be other impacts, but you would not require a point source discharge permit. So then that first question, let's say the question is, yes, this facility does have a point source discharge from its property, from its site. Then the second question to ask is, does that facility, is it covered? Are the potential pollutant sources covered? So for instance, you have a facility, but whether it's tanks or whatever it is, storing things around the site, if that is all, well, if it's completely inside, it's obviously covered. But even if it's done in such a way that you've got coverings, and so the storm water does not have the possibility of hitting these potential pollutant sources at all, then what you could possibly look at, let me see if this is live. Let me see. Okay, let me do this. Okay, I'm just going to move this over for a second. This is just the site within the stormwater homepage that talks about the stormwater no exposure certification, and it does require an application. It does require a visit from one of our regional office staff to basically confirm that there is no potential for contaminated stormwater to leave your site. But assuming you complete the application and the regional office signs off on your facility, then you possibly would be able to obtain a no exposure certification, and thus it basically shows that there's no need for you to get a discharge permit in this particular case, because you are not discharging pollutants of concern into the nearest waterway. But let's say you do have point source discharge, let's say you're not covered, you're not going to qualify for the no exposure certification. Then the next step is you are looking at the type of activity that occurs. And there are about, there are 12 main categories, and then within our stormwater branch, there are, I'm trying to think, count, 15, 16, there are a little less than 20 stormwater general permits. So basically, if you have a point source discharge and you're not covered, what you want to do is, oh, I know what I can do. I just thought of something to show this too. Forgive me a second. I'm going to be able to also provide you the website for the different industrial activities. Sorry, I didn't think of this earlier, but we can do it right now. So there's a there is a website. Here you go. Let me move this. Okay. So there's a website that lists a number of different industrial activities, from landfills to wastewater treatment plants to just a number of different industrial categories, and that can serve as guidance for you in determining whether the type of facility you operate is going to require coverage under the general permit. I'm just scrolling down through another presentation here, and it'll come up with this. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So, yeah, so here we go. Okay. Here we go. Let me do this. Okay, it's nice and one advantage of having a computer. So here we are. Does your activity fall within one of these 11 categories? This is actually from the federal regulations. As you can see, there's 11 main categories, pretty general, and there are SIC codes associated with them. So if your industry falls within one of these categories, you likely will look at applying for a stormwater general permit. And the reason I say if you fall in with one or maybe two, a general, if you fall within several categories up here, it's more likely that you would require an individual permit. And let's see here. Okay, I've got too many. Okay, now we're back here. So the general permits are designed such that they cover, as you saw from the other slide that I have, they cover general industrial categories. And so that if you have several different things going on, if your facility is more complicated, it's more likely that you will require an individual permit. The individual permit is a more lengthy process. An individual permit is a permit specific to the facility, whereas a general permit, you are applying for coverage. The North Carolina has a handful of general permits, and an applicant would require apply for coverage under a general permit. Individual permit is specific to the facility, and also the individual permits require public notice. So anyway, that's sort of, maybe that's more information you need, but that sort of gives you an idea of as you're going through the process, whether you need a permit or not, and when you, if you decide you do need one, what type of permit. And I'll also add, again, the regional office is also involved in this effort. Whenever a permit application comes into our office, it is followed by a site visit by a regional office staff person. And they, part of what they do is they will, yes, confirm that this facility does fall under general permit, NCGO 1, 2, 3, whatever, or they may make the recommendation after visiting the site. They may say, no, this actual, there's a lot more complexity associated with this facility. And so they may then say, no, this facility is going to have to apply for an individual permit because it really doesn't neatly fit under general permit coverage. All right, and this, the last part of this slide just talks about, lists the components, the basic components of a permit. All right, so yeah, the bottom part of this slide just just has the main components of each permit, and this is true of both the certificates of coverage and the which refer to the general permits and the individual permits. Okay, now I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay.
All right, so the other federal program is the MS4, and the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And this is a program that primarily covers local governments, primarily covers municipalities. But in North Carolina, we do have the North Carolina Department of Transportation, some military bases, and some universities also have MS4 permits as well. And actually, I should back up a step too for those of you that maybe you're not sure what MS4 is. So basically, in North Carolina, most people are familiar with the fact that there's a pretty comprehensive piping system that carries the processed wastewater, sanitary sewer waste, from your toilets, from your sinks, takes that underground, takes it to a wastewater treatment plant, or for just individual homes to septic system or something like that. Well, there's also a completely separate stormwater piping system that just collects the stormwater from the streets and the roofs and that type of thing. And that's what this program is designed to regulate, if you will. Basically and you can see the population information here. You can be designated to need to apply for an MS4 permit. There's a federal designation criteria, and then there's also state designation criteria. What that has resulted in as of right now, although that will likely change when the most recent census data is evaluated and looked at for our program, is there are about 120 MS4 permits right now. Again, most of them are municipalities. There are some others as well. Following the 2020 census, because of population growth in North Carolina and cities and municipalities growing in size, we will likely see an increase. In fact, we will see an increase in the number of governments that have that are covered by the MS4 permit. We're just not sure how many, and that will take a few years. So you probably won't see the new MS4 permittees until maybe 2023, 2024, something like that. All right, so you can go to the next slide.
More?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, next slide, yeah, please, yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is a brief update on just the MS4 program. So as a result of EPA examining a number of the different states, EPA looked at North Carolina and said North Carolina needs to basically improve their MS4 program. So that has resulted it started in late 2018, started in 2018 is through 2019 and will go on for several years. Basically, the state is going through auditing all of the MS4 permits. And so what this slide refers to, for those folks that are most involved in this, is just some expanded differing requirements, partially as a result of the COVID pandemic, and just as a result of experience gained from some audits that we have done. So again, there's expanded pre-audit documentation request. There's going to be some virtual audits, and then new NOV requirements. Okay, next slide, please. And again, the reason that we're even doing this is to try to not necessarily just meet requirements for EPA, but we're hoping as a result of this auditing and having MS4s more closely look at their programs, it will result in all the MS4s just operating their programs more efficiently and more effectively, and then because of that, they'll be, toward the bottom, they'll be compliant, and then that will result in better water quality. And then, of course, happy everyone at the bottom. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. And basically, following an MS4, you can get, after your evaluation, you can get three things. You can either get a notice of compliance, which means you are meeting all of your requirements. You can get a notice of deficiency, which means you are in pretty good shape, but you have one or two things that maybe need to be addressed, or a notice of violation, which means, unfortunately, your program will need some significant work to get back into compliance. Okay, next slide. So there's also an enforcement aspect to this, and that's basically, that's a worst case scenario. That's if a permittee did not, as it says, did not comply with the conditions in their notice of violation, they could be recommended for enforcement. There can be penalty amounts taken into account when doing this enforcement. And then at the bottom, it does say that just because DEQ takes enforcement, because this is, again, as I said early on, this is a federal program, EPA can take enforcement as well. All right, next slide. And this is the, just that during the audits, more documentation will be requested. The top bullets are the documentation requests that had been requested since the beginning of the audit process. The last three highlighted are additional things that will be requested in the pre-audit documentation request, again, before your audit even occurs. Because the assumption is that if you have an MS4 program, these three items should be something that you would have developed anyway. You should have them on hand. It's not something you should be having to develop from scratch. So this should be available to be reviewed as well. Okay, next slide. And this is basically what happens. So the documentation request goes in prior to an audit. If the permittee doesn't submit all the requested documentation, there will be a virtual audit, and unfortunately that means an automatic NOV, a notice of a violation. But it also means that there still could be followed by an in-person audit as well. So, okay, next slide, please. And again, this is just sort of a summary of the NOV requirements, the response letter, and the council resolution. They have been required since audits were starting. Number 3 is the new requirement, and 4 or 5 are requirements that are remain in place for the audit process, audit follow process. Okay, next slide, please. And again, this is just sort of a visual of the calendar, should you will, after you have an audit, after a municipality, for instance, has an audit, they have to send in a response letter within a month. Within 2 months, they have to pass what's called a council resolution. And again, if you have questions about specific things, this is just an overview. You can contact me later, or there's a MS4 contact at the end of these slides. Then within 120 days, you have to make sure all of these components have been drafted or improved, I should say, improved to meet conditions, or I guess drafted, you haven't done it yet. And then, as it says, really these should have been developed already. But again, if a permittee is having trouble, hasn't done it yet, then they'd be preparing them for the first time. And then the bottom just shows that the penalties can be significant associated with violations. Okay, next slide, please. And this is, Jeanette Powell is the MS4 coordinator, so she is probably the best person to contact if you have specific questions about the MS4 program, the audit process, or anything having to do with the program. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is a little bit of update for the industrial portion of the Stormwater program. We meaning the state, will be working with the permittees in electronic discharge monitoring reports. And as it says here, the goal is that by January 1st, 2021, the individual permittees will begin reporting by electronic DMR, and following that, the general permittees will begin reporting as well. There will be a website that has more detailed information within the Stormwater website. We're still in the process of developing, putting the pieces in place so this will work. So this is just to say, stay tuned if this applies to you, to check the Stormwater website, because there will be more EDMR information on that website in the future. Okay, next slide, please. This is to tell you that we're also in the process, well, we're always in the process of renewing the general permits. Remember, I spoke earlier about the general permits versus individual permits. General permits are, because they cover many different facilities, we basically just renew a general permit pretty much once every 5 years. So last year we did those listed here. This year we just focused on 3: mining, marinas, and a new, actually the NCG 25 is a new permit. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the remainder of the general permits. And this is what I was referring to when I said, I had that other slide that had the 11 categories or so from the federal. The state basically used those categories as a guidance to develop these general permits to, again, assist the permittee in basically finding a permit that suited their facility. And that's how we came up with these again, there's not 24, but these categories that you see here on this calendar. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then another area of the Stormwater program is the post-construction area. And as it said, basically, one needs a post-construction stormwater permit if you're developing or you have major modification to develop. And it covers all that. It covers residential, commercial, industrial, institutional. It also is very much connected to the area of the state in which you're located. As it says here, if you're in a coastal county, and there'll be post-construction permits requirements. If you're in an area that's draining to a high quality or outstanding resource water, and this is where there's a little bit of overlap or similarity between some programs. So I've talked about the NPDES MS4 program. There are the 6 minimum measures, and I guess I forgot, I'm just realizing I may have, sorry if I skipped over that slide. There are 6 minimum measures that are required under the MS4 permit. One is the post-construction. So in other words, if you are an MS4 permittee, you also have a post-construction requirement as part of your requirements. Then there's the urbanizing areas. This gets complicated. I'd be able to talk in more detail offline because it is complicated what urban areas are covered by post-construction and what aren't. And then there's the Universal Stormwater Program. There's only 6 entities within North Carolina that are under that, so I just wanted to mention it, but that doesn't pertain to a whole lot of folks in North Carolina. Next slide, please. All right, if you, Keith, what you could do here, which would be helpful, if you can click on that link. Oh, no, not next slide. On the previous slide, see that link, under it says post-construction permitting. Are you able to click on that link? Because that way I can show the map and just give you an idea how it works. Let's see.
Is it showing?
Oh shoot. Oh well. That's all right. That's all right. I mean they have the link there. Oh no, there it is. Okay, great. So just if you would, and hopefully this will work, Keith, after it becomes active, if you just hold your arrow over a gold or a green area, a yellow or green, and just click on it, and this is the type of information that will come up. Okay, yeah. So basically, okay, this is you're in Knightdale. It shows you the county, and it shows that you're a phase 2 entity. And then it's a local program. So that's the value of this map. You can click anywhere you are and it'll basically tell you what, okay, here's Yancey County, and see, this is a little bit, it can be tricky too. As you can see here, type. So this particular area in Yancey County, they drain to a high quality, outstanding resource water, but they're also water supply watershed. And so you have actually more than one program. So that was good. I just wanted to give folks an idea of that you can click on the map and it'll tell you those post-construction stormwater programs that apply to you for your particular area. Okay, yep. Now, last but not least, I'll talk a little bit about the program that I coordinate, and that is the Water Supply Watershed Protection Program. So you can do the next slide. First, a little bit history. It's been around for a while. As you can see, in 1989 is when the act was actually passed. And as it says right there, that the Environmental Management Commission had to adopt minimum statewide water supply protection standards and to reclassify the existing surface water supply watersheds to the appropriate classification. So in other words, so the waters would be accurately classified as water supply, and it's either 1 through 4. Okay, next slide. And so then in 1992, the division actually worked with the local governments in determining where the intakes were and where land uses were, and all this information, and types and locations of wastewater discharge, and all this information was used to then develop, okay, this water, this stream or river is a water supply, but is it, there's 4 different subcategories. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. This information was used to determine whether you had a WS1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, next slide. And so then following that classification effort that took place, then local governments were required, if they had either part or all of their jurisdiction within a water supply watershed, because let me back up a step. So you have the rivers or streams or lakes that were designated or classified as water supply, then you delineate the watershed up from that particular intake to identify your water supply watershed areas. So then if a municipality or county said, oh yeah, part or all of my jurisdiction is within a water supply watershed, then I have to implement the program. And that other map that I saw that Keith just shared for us, that also has the water. There's several different layers there, so it's hard to see. But that map also has the water supply watershed boundaries on that map as well. So as you click on an area in water supply watershed, as I think we saw for Yancey County, it will indicate that's the case. And then in 1993-94, that's when the rules were developed that required municipalities and counties, again, those that have part or all of their jurisdiction within water supply watershed, to develop, confirm their maps, their watershed maps, and then also develop ordinances. All right. And as of right now, there are currently, oh gosh, the way my thing is, I can't even see the numbers on my slide because Keith is showing. Let me move this. Okay, yeah. Okay, 229 watersheds. So there's about 291. And I say about because there's at least one new one that I'm working on right now. So we'll say there's about 291 local governments that have local water supply watershed programs. That's 82 counties, 208 municipalities, and 1 airport. One thing too, let's see. I think we have time. Keith, can you click on the fact sheet, the top one, what's allowed and not allowed? Do you see underneath resources? Yeah, just click on that fact sheet. These are just resources that I have recently, well, since I've been in the position, I've developed that just make it helpful if you are a municipality or a county and you are in a water supply watershed. This is just a helpful reminder of what are the different activities that are allowed and what are not allowed in your particular. Is it coming up? If it's not coming up, that's all right, because these links are also on the website as well. And I thought I could just come up, but if it's not coming up. And then the other bullet there, you don't have to open it. Oh, there it is. Okay. So yeah, as you can see across the top, you have WSN through WS5, and see down the left-hand side, there's just a lot of different activities that may be occurring within your watershed. And this tells you either yes or no, and you'll have to look at the footnotes as well. But this tells you yes, that activity is allowed, or no, that activity is not allowed. So that can just be a useful tool or reminder for the different things that are allowed or not allowed in your watershed. Okay, thanks, Keith. We can go back to the, we're toward the end. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. And this is just an update of things that are happening, very, very happening right now, essentially. So on August 13th, I sent a message just to all the local governments to administer water supply watershed programs that I'm going to be sending out a survey. And then over the next few days, as you can see, I did send out a survey. The intent of the survey, there were at least a few key reasons. One is for me to just, since as you saw, there are many, many programs, for me to just better learn about the programs and how they're doing. But I'm also hoping that I'm still waiting responses because we're sort of in the interim right now, waiting for local governments to return responses to the survey. I'll also hope that it'll generate questions. People, maybe if they're not sure about things with the survey, it'll help the people also, maybe especially if there's new staff, help them better learn about the water supply program so that they can more effectively run their programs. So those surveys are out. The first deadline is actually this Friday. And I should add, not only, I highlighted that, not only do they complete the survey so I can learn more about the different components, because there are many different aspects to the program, what parts of the program they're doing and not, because there's certain options, but it also is, there's an option to upload into Laserfiche. Remember I mentioned Laserfiche earlier, upload digital copies of their ordinance and or their maps. See, this is the effort to begin to get the water supply watershed protection information into Laserfiche. I mentioned a lot of the other programs are already there in the process. This is the first step in getting the water supply watershed information digital in our digital repository, essentially. Okay, next slide. And another thing that's going on with water supply watershed is the draft, the model ordinance that's on the website was prepared in 1995. And it's good, but there's been changes, not a lot, but there's some changes. And so what I've done recently is I drafted a new model ordinance. And right now I'm actually waiting I'm waiting on comments from the initial review, preliminary review. After I receive those comments, I will update it. I'll revise to include the comments. Then I'll probably have one final review. I'm hoping that by the end of the year, the new model ordinance will be available to local governments. And I think this is sort of timely because I'll be working with them with the surveys and getting information about the programs. The ordinance will be available. So this will be a time that local governments hopefully are re-examining their program, seeing, oh yeah, we can approve it here. The new ordinance will be available to them to use. So I'm hoping all of this, the fact that these things are happening at the same time will complement each other. Okay, next slide. And this is just the these are the stormwater contacts, and it's several slides because there's a few of us. So if you want to click down, Keith, this is the first group of us. It shows the name, what we do, and then yeah, and then actually the last slides. So that if you go one more slide or two more slides. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I forgot this slide. So this is that we work with the regional offices as well, not just stormwater, but the entire DEQ. Basically, the regional offices are mini departments. And basically, they are the ones that do the inspections. They respond to complaints. They're a very valuable part of all of DEQ. And so this is a precursor of the next slide, which has the regional office contacts. So the first group of contacts were your central office contacts. And there's one more slide. And these are the regional office contacts. We have at least one person in each of our regions that we work with to, as I said, do permitting, complaints, a lot of stuff like that. And I think the last, is there one more slide? I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's just my contact information. So, wow, okay. Didn't have extra time, and that's because unfortunately I was moving things around on my computer, so I apologize. I apologize that, but thank you for your patience, and I hope this was beneficial to everyone.
Thank you very much. That was great, very informing, and I don't see any immediate questions, which means that you were thorough. And
questions for him, Keith.
Yeah, great.
So you know, we talked a little bit about the water supply watershed program and how you're updating that ordinance, and I know you've sent questionnaires out to all the local governments. Going back to your slide where it showed the number of violations, or a number of people that were in violation of the permit being 31 compared to 7 who weren't. Do you foresee any type of audits for the water supply program that the local government should be preparing for?
Okay.
The stormwater program?
Yeah.
And if so, should they be preparing for that?
Okay, that's a good question. And actually, I'm not sure, Johnny, where you saw the 31 and 7. I'm not sure where those numbers.
No, I'm sorry. I was talking about the number of stormwater program. There were 31, I believe, that had a notice of violation for.
Oh, you're talking about the MS4 now.
Yeah. I was just comparing
okay. Yeah, okay.
Comparing those numbers.
Okay, and that's okay. So yeah, the MS. Yeah, let me. That's a good question. So there is a difference, but there's similarities. So yeah, the MS4 program is definitely undergoing audits, as I said, and there are notices of violation being issued. I mean, that is definitely occurring right now, and that effort will be underway for several more years. The water supply watershed program is more of, at least initially this phase, more of an information gathering. So the survey is meant to gather information. But I will say, though, that I really hope I get surveys because, for instance, after the deadline passes, and I've had to give a few extensions because unfortunately some people didn't get my first time it was sent out. But anyway, let's say after I get all the information from those that have responded, one thing that I will probably do to prioritize, I'm not calling them audits, I'm actually calling them program reviews, is those that have not actually responded to the surveys. So the short answer is I'm not calling these audits per se, I'm calling them more program reviews. But at the same time, I will prioritize, in fact, those local governments that I most likely maybe follow up and visit and have some sort of follow-up are those that I don't get any information from, because then I'll be like, what are they doing anything? It'll just scratch my head and wondering why I haven't received anything from them. So does that help to answer the question?
Yeah, that does
Okay.
answer the question. And so hopefully the people that are online that work for us will fill out all those
and as I said too, please, if they have any questions, because I've gotten some already, if they, while they're doing the surveys, or if they, something they don't understand, they're more than welcome to contact me, and I can try to answer as many questions as I can for them if they don't understand certain things or have questions about anything. Yeah.
And as a follow-up to that, early on, a lot of people received waivers from the stormwater program because they had the water supply watershed. For those local governments, and I'll go back to that in a minute, but for those local governments that have both programs, could you explain a little bit how they work ordinance-wise if you have overlapping jurisdictions?
Oh, okay. I'm pretty sure I know what you're referring to, and it is confusing, and it's the post-construction world, and you sort of got that idea from that map that Keith helped, click on the map, and how you could have more than one program. In other words, you could have to possibly abide by more than one post-construction stormwater program. The waiver I think you're referring to is that for those MS4 permittees, about there's 120 of them, yes, there are some of those MS4 permittees that have part or all of their jurisdiction within a water supply watershed. So what that actually means for that entity, let's say Town A, and Town A has part of their part of their areas within a water supply watershed. What it means, yeah, I could try to. Unfortunately, this has all the layers, so I don't know whether I could click on. See, they're just water supply watershed. There are some that that have part of this jurisdiction. They're an MS4. Mm-hmm. And part of their jurisdiction falls within a water supply watershed. What that means is just for the post-construction component of their MS4 requirements, they can defer to their water supply watershed. And the reason that exists is because water supply watershed has been around, as we saw from the history, it's been around since the early 90s. The phase 2 program under MS4, I think, came about like 2000 or something like that. So in other words, a number of these communities already had their water supply watershed ordinance programs in place. And instead of doing something new or whatever, basically the decision was made, okay, if you already have a water supply watershed program in place, and now you have to meet MS4 requirements, for the post-construction part of your MS4 program, you can defer to your water supply watershed protection requirements.
Okay, yeah, and then that's what we've been telling our people is to get back to the water supply watershed, and I just wanted clarification to make sure that will still be the case going forward.
Yeah.
A secondary part of that, the waivers that you guys gave out, do you foresee ever coming back and reviewing those local governments that have received waivers from the stormwater program?
That's a good question, because the big picture issue is, as you can see from that map, is the post-construction stormwater program is complicated because there are so many. Because I didn't even touch upon the fact that maybe not as much in the western part of the state, but in the eastern part of the state or central part of the state, you've also got nutrient-sensitive water requirements, and there's just so many different post-construction requirements. It can get very confusing when trying to decide what an entity is supposed to do. So this would not happen immediately, but it would address waivers and be exempt from one program and falling under another program, looking at if stormwater can even help to simplify the entire program. You know what I mean? Simplify it so that there's not so many different post-construction programs, and that an entity may only have one or two as opposed to possibly having 3, 4, or 5 or something like that. So I know that was sort of a fuzzy answer, but we do want to, the stormwater group does want to re-examine that and see if we can make it simpler. Although I can't give you a time frame, just because as you can tell, we as a branch do a lot of different stuff. So we'll just have to see when we're able to big time. A time maybe when to do it would be stormwater rules again are up for review. I think in 2022 maybe. I think that's about right. So that may be a time, and I don't pin that date to the wall or anything, but that maybe would be a time when we're looking at rules review to look at that as well.
Okay. And I have one more question for you, and it may not be something you might be able to answer. But, you know, in this age of COVID, we have, as you see today, we're on an online conference rather than in person. And a lot of the permits require outreach for the local governments. And, you know, we have pretty specific things in some of the permits about going out and meeting the public and doing things like that. Do you see any issues with trying to be creative and do outreach in different ways than maybe we've written? For instance, you know, trying to integrate more video, things like that into the outreach?
Well, I would say, again, I probably want Jeanette to weigh in on this too, because I think you're talking about like the public outreach requirement within the MS4 and that type of thing. Yeah, and I would say maybe defer to her, but generally I would say one of the key things that is being done, as you're probably aware, as a result of the MS4's basically trying to get their programs up to speed, is that much more specific when you have, you know, your permit and then you have your stormwater management plan and you have key items, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. So I would say if it's clearly outlined in your stormwater management plan, you know, under public education or outreach and stuff like that, and I plan to do A, B, and C, and you can probably even document, due to the COVID-19, we're going to put more emphasis on, you know, on maybe virtual training or something like that. As long as it's documented, I'm planning on doing this, and then when the evaluation comes and say, yes, I did this, and I met it, and to me, as long as you can, one of the key things, you've probably heard this before, as long as it's documented what you are intending to do and what you're planning to do, I think that's the most important aspect of it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Would that be an amendment to a plan, a stormwater management plan?
Good question, because I know ideally you're supposed to do it, you know, once every 5 years when the permit is up. I guess now I think you'd maybe have to contact Jeanette to see how she'd want to handle that, because as you probably imagine, we have a lot to do just with the regular renewals that we're going through right now.
Great. Well, that's all my questions.
And I think we are out of time, but that was wonderful. Thank you so much for the updates, and I've learned a lot, and I'm guessing Kelly has too, and many others. But we're going to move on. I can hear the crowd going wild once again. So thank you once again.